And the project, New York City Parents Speak Out, is highly interactive, participatory project. Again, I would say Wendy's work always pushes the boundaries, asks the hard questions of research, what we should study, why, who, and how. Project after project, she models an interactive participatory research paradigm. Wendy's coined a phrase for her work, which I love. I love it. She calls it collaborative seeing, expanding ways of doing visual research. She says these include acknowledging different ways of seeing, listening to, feeling, representing, re-representing, rearranging, and repurposing images to engage in research and communicate what we have heard. Well, in a world when working in the academy can sometimes feel rather obsolete place to be located, with depleted resources and compromised visions of what our work as educators is and should be, Wendy Luttrell's work is always inspiring. It challenges us to probe deeper into the worlds we seek to understand, and ultimately demands that we be more accountable scholars. So with that, I will ask Wendy to say a few words, not a few words, for Wendy to present her work, and then I will say a few words about Rachel and Shirin. Thank you, Wendy.
Wow, I'm incredibly humbled by your introduction, Molly. That was incredible. And one thing that I do want to say about these dark times in higher education is that we're here because of the fortitude of Molly and Corinne and others to fight against the closure of the Center for Narrative Research at the University of East London. And despite the most despicable set of actions, these two have just kept going. It's like the little energy bunny that, you know, they're just not going to take it. And I am incredibly proud to be able to be part of the new Association for Narrative Research and Practice, ANRP, that has brought us together. And I just can't say enough about the inspiration that I think both Molly and Corinne have tapped for all of us in this kind of dark time. And I really look forward to having the Grad Center and other institutions really glom on to this association and continue the spirit of the center with even greater oomph than University of East London, which doesn't deserve mentioning, would ever have been able to support. So saying that, and one quick word about what I really appreciate, Molly, about your statement about me as a listener. That to me is the highest compliment. And just yesterday, the team, in talking about getting our brief out on the New York City Parents Speak Out, we were talking about what different roles people would have. And I said, listen, I really don't want to do any press conversations. I would rather sit and talk with a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, than I would a member of the press. So please, will somebody from the team agree to do all that? And you're so right. I'd much rather listen. And that's really why I also get very nervous at these events. So let me start by saying this book came out 2020, just weeks before the world changed. And it feels like a universe ago. And as a lot of the images that I'm going to show you, image-wise, it really documents the book. I feel now is really more like social history than it is anything else, because of how it brings us back to a moment of time starting in 2003 and going through 2012, and then making us really think about how quickly technology changes. And just as we all are here, this is just a mode of communication that we couldn't have envisioned pre-pandemic. But I think that what really COVID and systemic racism, the dual pandemics, has cracked open is a real push for a national agenda, international agenda around care and its infrastructure. So I, in some ways, feel like what the kids had to say and depict was prescient of just how poor, how totally unample our notions of care and its importance, its centrality, its emotional resonance is for all of us. So the questions that animate the book are really about how do we interrupt habitual ways of seeing and, importantly, not seeing care. And I want to quickly go to one of the digital interludes. There are 5 that are on the website that will introduce you to the project briefly, and again, take us into a world that may be unrecognizable in some ways now. So I'll share my screen and hopefully easily take you into our first digital interlude. Too much of urban education research is preoccupied with problems, brokenness, stigma, and blame. In 2003, I undertook a visual research project to offer an alternative vision, a vision grounded in diverse, working-class children's photographs of their school, family, and community lives. Why did I turn to photography? Because photographs are part of how we read our social worlds, construct ourselves in relation to others, and capture the present and remember the past. Talking about images is known to introduce topics, mobilize feelings, and surface knowledge that might otherwise be overlooked or not fully understood by outsiders, in this case, adults like me, who are trying to learn with and from children. Collaborative seeing is a multisensory practice and a stance towards knowing. As visual theorist John Berger writes, the relationship between what we see and what we know is never settled. Collaborative seeing is fueled by the questions, whose way of seeing is this? In what context? With what degree of power, authority, or control? Toward what purpose? And with what consequences? 36 children were given cameras at ages 10, 12, 16, and 18. They had several opportunities to speak about their own and each other's images, first with an interviewer, then in small groups without adult direction, again as they prepared to publicly exhibit their work, and finally as teenagers looking back on their childhood images. Combine content analysis of the images with narrative analysis of how and what individual children say about their photographs. I do this to trace their identity work, and to learn in what ways they uphold, bend, and reject social divisions and discourses that shape their family and school worlds. So that very quickly gives you an idea, and again, that visual image of unbelievable old-timey stuff. But I want to take you into the building through the words of the kids, two of the tour guides, and read a bit from the book, as well as giving you some images that go along with their pointing out to me the most important things they wanted me to pay attention to. So again, I'm going to share the screen while I do the reading and show the images. And make sure that I have them ready. Okay. So Kendra and Alonso took me on a tour, which was my first inkling of the children's orientation toward care. My guides were astute witnesses of the conditions under-resourced nature of their school. We used to have lots more library books, but it was flooded last year, they explained, as they walked me quickly past the library. They were knowledgeable about which classes shared space with another grade because of overcrowding. While they wanted to show me inside their classrooms, they said we shouldn't disturb the others. They would show me their desks later. The children warned me as we descended the stairs to the basement that it might be pretty dark and spooky, but it would be all right. They wanted me to see the cafeteria and were excited that I was there for pizza day, by far their favorite. They made a point to show me the little kids class and how it was positioned next to the cafeteria so they don't have to walk too far. Kendra took me to a colorfully painted mural on the wall, while Alonso steered me into a broom closet where he had once walked thinking it was the bathroom. Neither recommended using the bathroom, saying, I would want to wait or use the teacher's lounge. Passing the bathroom, they pointed to a sign on the hallway wall, the 5 Bs. These are the school rules. You can take a picture of it. It shows how we care for our school. They took special pride in showing me the principal's office, explaining that she cared for the school. Dr. G is nice. She takes her time and is kind to kids with problems. She gets special things for the school, like the new computer lab, which was our next stop on the tour. Aside from the computers and big screen, both mentioned the new chairs that swiveled. The playground was last, and as if anticipating a question that they thought I might ask, they told me that it didn't matter to either of them that there was no play equipment. What mattered was that you could cut through it and walk to the apartment complex where they lived. Terrace Gardens, they announced, and it only takes us 3 minutes to get to school. You can see it from here. Terrace Gardens, or the projects as it was referred to by the school staff, bordered the school and was home to a large proportion of its student population. So I want to lift up some of the elements of Kendra's and Alonso's orientation toward care that foreshadowed so much of what I would learn. First was the centrality and salience of how care manifests from their perspectives. I heard in Kendra's and Alonso's directives what to pay attention to, their protectiveness and concern about the little kids' safety. Safety being an issue that would come up more and more as the years went on. Their assurances to me that what mattered to them more than play equipment was the closeness of school to their homes. And again, I would hear time and again about the incredible, complicated arrangements that could change daily depending upon parent work schedules, illnesses, job changes, what I came to call the choreography of care, in which the kids were primary dancers. In navigating their school to home transitions, safety and time was prized. I heard in the kids' admiration for Dr. G, who cares for the school, an awareness that care takes time and resources, including special resources like the new computer lab. These signs of care signal to them that their lives and learning are worth investing in. Finally, there was pride in their voice, a sense of self-regard for their own standing as elders in the school world, and a strong affinity as full members of a school community, a school of 5 Bs that cared. So when the project started, I was really interested in the role that gender, race, ethnicity, and class in terms of relative advantage and immigrant status would have on how the children represented their lives. And I could have written a book about that, but as it turned out, my affinity and listening around this arc of conversation about care is what I ended up really wanted to present to the world. And as I mentioned in the video, I had turned to using photography for several reasons, but especially because of the portability of cameras and as a way to tap into both emotional and geographical spaces in children's lives worlds. You could see we used disposable cameras. They had 27 exposures, 4 days to photograph their everyday lives. The prompt was, imagine you have a cousin your age who is moving to town and coming to your school. Take pictures of your home, school, and community that will help him or her know what to expect. And then the children brainstormed themselves a set of additional prompts about what they wanted to take pictures of. And I want to just say a quick note here, methodologically speaking, is that the camera, which we now, particularly in schools, understand to be a mode of surveillance. And of course, in 2003, the ubiquity of cameras on cell phones and everywhere was really not like that, which is hard for us to remember. But the idea of the camera was a welcoming tool. Here, welcome your cousin to this new place. And I think that that's an important element of how the kids understood how they were using the camera. And there's so much we could talk about in terms of this and in terms of ethics and whatever, but hopefully we'll have time for that. And if not, something to keep in your mind. I wanted to show one particular photo that we can all kind of look at for a moment. And as I say in the book, one of the people who inspired the way I went about then analyzing was Howard Becker and his 1976 instructions to us about not to stare, but to look attentively. And I want to talk about looking and feeling and wondering when we lay our eyes on a photograph for a while. So again, let me take you into the image. I'm going to just briefly walk through some of these to give you a sense before I settle on the one that we're going to talk about for a moment. These are all taken in response to those questions. Their brainstorms. What do you do after school? What matters to you most? Where do you feel comfortable? Who do you admire? Where do you feel respect? What concerns you? And here we have Terence's photograph. And most viewers read this photograph through the lens of childhood consumption as a snapshot of a kid in a candy store you might consider just throwing into the chat some of your own first impressions. Whereas some see this photo as innocence and childhood pleasures, others have seen the moment as somewhat foreboding. A young person, most likely male, in the blue hooded jacket and outstretched arm, about to steal a piece of candy, as if taking on the gaze of a suspicious shopkeeper. Terrence, an 11-year-old Haitian American participant in the project, handed his camera over to the local shopkeeper. He asked him to photograph his after-school routine and had this to say: "After school, I walk my younger cousins home and help them with their homework. Sometimes we stop at the corner and I get a candy bar so they will get their work done quick, because I have to check it and make sure it is right before my aunt gets home at 6:30. Terrence splits the candy bar into pieces, using each bit to bribe his cousins. The backstory to the image has so much to tell us. First and foremost, that because of so many circulating ideas about urban youth, our eyesight is pressed into seeing something quite different than the collectivity of care that is taking place here. This picture tells about the shopkeeper who Terrence reports doesn't charge him for the candy bar and who agreed to take the photograph. It tells us of Terrence's extended family rhythms and routines and how Terrence is himself a key player in this choreography. I want to consider Terrence as an education broker. I want to give a shout out here to Marjorie or Ilana, who helped me think that through. She talks about language brokering, and I really see this care work as education brokering, whose work is not only contributes to family life, but to his own and others' learning. This work has civic significance. It matters because it secures educational access and preparedness for children in communities that have been denied public investment. U.S. educational scholar Gloria Ladson-Billings, in her key reframing of the so-called achievement gap to framing it as an opportunity gap, might identify Terrence and all those who share his family caregiving responsibilities as part of the educational debt we owe to generations of poor and working class kids of color. In doing research for this book, now I'm going to stop sharing this, I discovered that we know far too little about the inequitable distribution of family care demands on kids' lives, including the 1.4 million American children from ages 8 to 18 who provide care for a sibling, an older adult, or a disabled adult, and who range from 8 to 18, 8 to 11-year-olds, of which there are 400,000. Those figures are from 2015, which is the last large-scale study on this topic, which is way too long ago. And we can only imagine what the impact of the COVID pandemic has had on those numbers. The children in this project went to great lengths to portray their family care work, taking pictures of many activities: cooking, laundry, shopping, taking care of ill family members, translating for family members. Their labor was presented as routine, as occasional or exception, not as occasional or exceptional. And it was motivated by love and mutual obligation. For example, my mom takes care of me, so I need to take care of and help her. It was also presented, as I've said many times, as a point of pride and self-regard, if not also woven in some ambivalence and pain. I want to not actually take so much time as to move into the feeding the family and talking about what the kids had to say about moms. I would invite you to go to the website to view that one, called Feeding the Family. But the main points to pull out from those accounts, as well as what they had to say about teachers and kids in their own learning groups at school, is that care is not an individual pursuit. It is a collective action that gets put into motion and is coordinated by and experienced in terms of interlocking relationships between families, schools, and workplaces. Workplaces become especially important when we're thinking about the role of parents who themselves, many of whom were care workers. And second, that the kids' visions of care emphasize an ethos of other-centeredness and sociality that needs to be part of any new narrative of care. I want to close by sharing 3 important policy recommendations that have been put out by a care work network that I belong to, and I think there may be others of you on the call here who are part of our organization. And I understand that there are similar ones in the UK and Canada who are building a care agenda. And the idea is that we all know that people's physical and emotional needs cannot exist without social and economic supports. I know we have Kathleen Lynch, and she's done a tremendous writing about the importance of care and developing policies that support that. And whether we're talking about care at the most intimate relations in our communities, or at the national or at the planet level, it requires a shift in the way we value and ascribe care work, as well as massive public investment in caring infrastructure. So the 3 policy recommendations that we have is, first, universal paid leave for anyone with caring responsibilities and anyone who requires care. The freedom to care means not having to choose between a paycheck and caring for those we love. That's recommendation 1. Recommendation 2 is to support and protect care workers. I know we have Mary Romero on the call here, very important advocate and someone I am indebted to for lots of the way that I have understood and wanted to write about care. These workers, care workers, are predominantly women of color, as we know, as well as immigrants, and are the lowest paid, most vulnerable category of workers. And finally, to make schools universal care centers. School closings during COVID made it abundantly clear that schools do much more than educate youth, especially in partnership with local resources and a model of what has in the United States is called community schools. They can provide vision screening, mental health services, free, low cost and healthy meals, social work assistance for students who are living in temporary housing. All of these are necessary for learning. As care centers, schools can offer enriching after school and summer programs that provide childcare for working parents, coupled with extra quality learning experiences for children and youth. The need to invest in care is undeniable. And I believe that the measure of our success as we build toward a national care agenda will be shaped by our fairness about who is obliged to do the work of care, for whom, at what costs, with what supports, protections, and rights. And most importantly, from my perspective, having listened and learned from these 36 children, for the consequences for their education. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy, so much. What a wonderful invitation to us to start thinking about these important issues together. So I'm going to introduce Rachel Thomson and Shirin Rai at the same time, and each of them will contribute here. I can think of really no 2 people more suited to be in conversation with this wonderful work than these 2. It really just gives me real delight. not only because of the content of your project, Wendy, but because of the sheer creativity and passion that lies behind it, okay? And your really exemplary willingness to try new methodological ways of attacking problems. Well, if that describes anyone, it certainly describes Rachel and Shirin. I'm just going to say very briefly about them, and then I'm going to put links to their two respective research centers so people can check it out themselves. So Rachel, who I'm going to ask to go first, Rachel is a co-director of the Center for Innovation and Research in Childhood and Youth at the University of Sussex. She's professor of childhood and youth studies, and she is known as a methodological innovator. She's especially interested in capturing lived experience, social processes, and the interplay of biographical and historical time. And the areas of focus of her research are in transitions and the life course, young people's sexual cultures, qualitative longitudinal methods, and digital childhoods. So we're going to first have Rachel, and then Rachel will be followed by Shirin Rai. And Shirin is the director of Warwick Interdisciplinary Research Center for International Development, wonderfully called WICID. I think that's very suitable. And Shirin has written extensively on issues of gender, governance, development, gender and political institutions. And the two books that she's currently working on, because Shirin never does things in halves, of course, but one of them is called Depletion, the Human Cost of Care. And the other is a wonderful, wonderful book, a series of essays called Doing Politics Sideways, again, where Shirin invites us to think differently about how we do political research. Okay, so I think I will finish with the introductions and just ask Rachel if she can kick us off with her set of comments, please.
Thank you, Molly, and thanks so much for inviting me to contribute today. It's a real honour to engage with Wendy's work in this kind of direct way, and it's wonderful to be able to lead the appreciation of what is a really wonderful book. So we're all situated in time, and we write from points in our biography into cultural landscapes that are shaped by the synchronicity of the present. And we can think about that in terms of politics theories, technology, importantly, but also the concerns of the moment. But we're also shaped by the traditions that we see ourselves within. And this includes our citational practices, our imagined audiences, the books and the academic friendships that have made us. And nice to see some of those books around the various members of today's audience. This kind of sense of where we write from and how we're situated in time was something I became acutely aware of when I was reading Wendy's wonderful book. And I think that there's a sense in which it really evoked temporality in some quite complicated ways. And reflecting on it, I was thinking that the book manages to be simultaneously three things. Firstly, and I think really importantly, it's a work of intellectual autobiography, even though that's maybe under the radar rather than the top note. It gave me a real sense of how this project is the culmination of a research career and how it's interlaced with Wendy's other experiences as an academic, as a mother, as a grandmother, and as an activist for progressive public education. It's also a kind of state of the nation polemic involving or providing a critique of generations of social policy, but also a sense of kind of exhaustion with a progressive project around public education in the face of the way in which profound inequalities now seem to be just accepted as part of a late capitalist globalized economy. And in that respect, it feels like the book marks the end of something also, and perhaps that's its kind of generational quality. I also think that the book is about, or marks the beginning of something new. The suggestion that research may be something other than, or in addition to, what Wendy describes as a project of complaint, and I'm quoting from her here, constructing explanatory and predictive variables about class-based childhood. It's something that's both more modest than that, but yet more profound, offering new practices of documentation and representation that involve not just the recognition of subjecthood, but also a willingness to share the role of storyteller. In some respects, this is the politics of bare life that we are living with, and a focus on care, the willingness to be told what is important, and then to sit with the results, to digest and reflect on the dignity of care, what the conditions of readiness actually might be, and the myth of a carefree child, are all importantly part of coming to terms with an America, in this case, where we could say, talk about this in terms of a not so Great Britain or a European Union, that has broken with the narrative of inclusion, progress and modernity. So in terms of what this is, what the book does that's new, for me, it's a meditation of and with hope rather than an explanation. And it feels like that really marks it as something, as a new kind of mode of address within the sociology of education, if you like. Although I feel that I know Wendy's work, I found it was necessary to slow down in order to really connect with the book. Time is so profoundly bound up in its making that it demands that we take time and make time in its reception. And it took me a while to properly do so. And I was glad and relieved when I finally did. And I think that's this idea that this experience I'm sure many of us have of buying a book or receiving a book and living with the book without actually having read or properly engaged with the book. So not simply just reading introductions and conclusions, but actually sitting with and engaging properly with a piece of writing. In doing that, in properly engaging, I realised that I, and I'm sure other readers also, will experience themselves as being on a parallel track with Wendy, facing new methodological questions for researchers that are produced by digital methods and technological developments. Importantly, the democratization of documentation that these bring, and the potential for collaborative and slow ways of seeing. In different ways and from different positions, I realised that we had been thinking about similar things. And some of the things that really struck me in terms of where I felt a resonance or ways in which it connected with the work I've been doing, first of all, is about the relationship between an archive and a book. And I found that really fascinating, that behind this book, there is an archive of the material which could be read in different ways, and there's an active relationship between those two. Second sort of point of connection is around what I would call recursive methods, and I think this comes very much where you the invitation for the children when they're older to look back at and think again about some of the data that they had produced, and the ways in which these recursive methods kind of break down the fourth wall between research practice and the everyday, and how that can bring with it ideas of deep listening and collaborative seeing, which are not simply on the part of the researcher, but the idea of the researcher is expanded. The third is modes of representation and ethics that are much less certain and less finished than perhaps we've been used to in the past, and a recognition of unconscious as well as conscious processes within that. And a sense of humility about our role as researchers, activists, fellow travellers, and a willingness to join in and help rather than own, tell, and save. And I was reflecting that in terms of the shift that this is part of, that we're no longer simply in the business of making public problems from private troubles, you know, the sort of C. Wright Mills mantra that resonates very well with feminist mantras. That's very much been, I think, part of what, certainly what I've understood as being a public sociologist. In the context of the new technology and an attention economy, we can start to think about research in some other ways as well. Actually thinking about research as a form of care in itself and a form of meditation in itself. Wendy uses the term imaginative inquiry to frame this approach, suggesting that we need to revise our own roles and ways of seeing, and that this kind of revision won't happen on its own. And I just wanted to read a little bit from the book on this, because I thought that it struck me so strongly, and thought it for me was the heart of the matter. So forgive me, Wendy, for reading you back to you. And this is on page 210. In the course of the years I spent with these young people, looking through their camera lenses and listening to their voices, I encountered pictures of care that were at once broader, more complicated, more intimate, more emotionally saturated, and more profoundly discerning than I had anticipated. They shared with me a view of care that was acutely sensitive to individual relationships, feelings, timeframes, economic pressures, and scales of value. They recognized where care might be overlooked, and they took steps to address its invisibility, correcting my vision. Again and again, it was as if they said to me and to their audience, look, here, see, I want to show you that this is important. I don't want you to miss it. This is what really matters. So Molly asked us to, as in our responses, to maybe raise a question that we had for Wendy. And I suppose my question really goes to the heart of the matter about what, on reflection, she thinks research practice is in contemporary times, or can be in contemporary times, and maybe how that has changed over her career as a researcher. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And I mean, that's just such an easy, light question, right, Wendy? I really look forward to I look forward to hearing you on a great question and really, really thoughtful, characteristic commentary from Rachel. Thank you. So without saying anything more, I think we'll turn now to Shirin Rai and listen to what Shirin has to say.
Thank you, Molly, firstly for inviting me, and thank you, Wendy, for writing this book. Wendy and I met in Molly's home. I think that 3 years ago. Some of my best relationships have started in Molly's homes, as she knows. So thank you for that. And I remember the excitement I felt talking to Wendy when I came to know about this book. Because I was starting some work on children and care at that time. So thanks for influencing my work, for talking with me, communicating with me across the pond. I also want to underline what Wendy said earlier in her introductory remarks, which is we miss CNR, but I think ANPR is going to be great. And it is wonderful to be part of this community of scholars and activists and thinkers. which ANPR brings together so well, thanks to the energies of Molly and Corinne. So thank you for that. Obviously, again, as Wendy has said, we are thinking through the problems of care under very difficult circumstances and realizing the importance of care, but in my own work, also looking at filling the gaps that care and carers are having to fill with a bit rather, I think it was John McKnight who said this thing about the careless society, but I want to say the careless state, really, as issues of austerity and sort of, carelessness of the state continue to haunt us. So while I think, Wendy, you're right that 2012 seems a very long time ago in terms of where we are today, I think the focus of your research and your methodology continue to be really, really important, more important now than ever before. Children Framing Childhoods, Working Class Kids' Vision of Care is a beautiful book. Beautiful in many registers, the photographs, the videos, the cutouts, but also the writing, which is luminous. The book starts with the observation that educational research and practice is preoccupied with problems, brokenness, stigma, and blame. As a result, too many people are unable to recognize the capacities and desires of children and youth growing up in working class communities. But this is no superficial looking at the bright side writing. It is deeply embedded in the lives of the children that Wendy's talked to, listened to, been with, who have participated in this research. It places them at the center of analysis in their own words, some of which we heard today already from Wendy in their photographs and videos. It's not simply giving voice to children, it speaks through them. While there is now considerable research on the largely adverse impact of paid labor by women outside and inside the home, and some by children outside the home, so child labor in factories and on farms and brick kilns in India, its impact on their physical and mental health, there's only limited scholarship on children's social reproductive or care work. Globally, we have seen increasing evidence that children also do care work. They participate in housework, help with family businesses, care for siblings and ill parents and grandparents. Children not only contribute care labor to their households, they often head these households in HIV/AIDS affected areas, for example. Children migrate to help their families. Often they are sent abroad by parents desperate to keep them safe and arrive in new countries, unaccompanied and feeling totally alone. Children are displaced by conflict. There are estimated 13 million child refugees in the world, and around 1 million refugee children in Europe itself, contributing to their families on the move through dangerous terrains by helping with everyday chores and care needs. Children also care in different economic and social contexts, and I think those contexts were so clearly and poignantly and powerfully brought together to frame Wendy's work. So I think for this audience to say that children care and children do care work is not going to be revelatory in a way that I feel very often it is in many audiences. Wendy Luttrell has developed a methodology called choreographies of care, which Molly referred to. And I found this extremely helpful in the 2 pieces of work that I've done on children who care. One very close to me, which is, close to hand rather. I live in a small town in the Midlands in the UK, and our big city is Coventry. And the other with my colleague Jean Brugo in Mexico City. And in doing both those pieces of work, I found Wendy's work a real help to think through some of the issues that we were faced with. But also doing that work, and as Molly has said, my work is on the costs of care. We also have some differences in our approach, which I would like to sort of say a little bit about. So what is this choreography of care? Of course, these are simply put just the beautiful photographs taken by children and their words that accompany them. And as Wendy puts it, it makes these choreographies visible by the kids as a means to shine a light on the interrelated and coordinated elements. People, time, feelings, intimacies, values, dynamics of power, which of course is so important. And we've heard quite a bit also about the second strand, which she builds on with John Berger's wonderful work, New Ways of Seeing, which is collaborative seeing, the sights, sounds, feel, and aliveness of people, places, and ideas that are presented. And I think that that collaborative seeing comes through so much in the videos that accompany this book. Just going through that door of the school for the first time, seeing things not as individually by Wendy, but actually seeing through the narratives of the children as they explain the school, their school, the school that cares for them and they care for, to Wendy. So Wendy's work is important not only for developing these new methodologies, however, and learning from children, but also for insisting upon an alternative, and I'm sort of quoting Wendy here to her, an alternative social orientation in which care and care work take their rightful place at the center of everyday life. And I think that is where Wendy and my work kind of come together in a big way. When she says that care matters in childhood, in development, in schooling from kids' own perspective, I get it. By participating in care works, she argues, that children can also come to understand the collective responsibility for care, pushing back against the individualized neoliberal framings of society. Where I have a little bit of a different experience through my own research was that while the children that I talked to in Coventry, as well as that Jean, my colleague, talked to in Mexico City, children who care accept that they have responsibility to their families. They own those responsibilities. Sometimes they actively wished to contribute to the family through their labor, even though this labor is framed by social and economic constraints. But we also found that they cared in circumstances very often, as Wendy's work also shows, not of their own choosing. Their work, what we found quite interesting was that they actually did not want to talk about care work at all as work, which is an interesting difference with Wendy's work, because in Wendy's book, she talks about perhaps, she says, and I cite, perhaps the most essential of the young people's insights in this project is their profound basic understanding that care is work. It requires time, effort, resources, coordination. It demands attention and investment. It is mundane, necessary, and arduous. And what we encountered was that as soon as the term work was used in association with care, the children we spoke to kind of stepped back. Instead, we found them using terms such as help and helping, looking after, worrying came up a lot. This was underlined also in the response to whether they get any money for the work they do. There was surprise, puzzlement, even outrage at this. Pocket money, yes, but transactional payment, no. And that does connect with the collective nature of care that Wendy talks about. So I think what I also gained from Wendy's work was about, and again, Rachel has mentioned that, is the temporality of care. And I wanted to do some work with children in terms of charting their day. And I wish I'd kind of thought of these throwaway cameras before, but I didn't. They were not very happy about what we political economists do, is to give people time use diaries, right? They didn't want to do that, but time is of the essence. And the fact that it is, as Wendy sort of points out, there's a difference between ordinary and extraordinary time, school time and homework time. But there's also time for the free time for self. We were very conscious listening to the children that there was also a sadness there about the time that is not spent with their friends or making friends, which was difficult for us actually to respond to. And finally, what I want to, so there are some things which align and very beautifully in my work, and I learned from Wendy's book. There are others which I'd love to talk more with you about, Wendy. I think maybe it is that Wendy's book spoke to me in so many different ways, centering of children's care work, underlying the importance of the work that is so often overlooked and misframed. Looking at this work through the eyes of children, that allows us insights into how children themselves regard this work as important as work, and as sometimes work that they are happy to do, consent, but also work that has real costs to them in terms of time and in terms of their sense of self. So reflecting upon my work after reading Wendy's book, and I went over it again in the last couple of days for this event, I see that made me feel a little bit like I'm the Eeyore to Wendy's Pooh or even Tigger. While Wendy shines a light on children's care work as empowering, I also see it as depleting for the children I spoke with. Wendy sees the regard they have for care work and its meanings, most importantly, the freedom to care, as a radical possibility within education and society. And I find that, yes, that is true, but there are also costs that they experience that we cannot afford to overlook. So thank you, Wendy.
Okay, thank you, Shirin. Very much providing wonderful questions, food for thought. And before we open up the floor, I would like to give Wendy the opportunity to respond to these two sets of, really wonderful, very probing commentaries. And hopefully we'll have at least 10 minutes at the end for everyone else to ask your own questions. So please, Wendy.
Wow, what gifts. Thank you so much, Rachel and Shirin. Those were really provocative and just so insightful. I love the kind of temporality issue. I would never have dreamed of thinking about this book as an intellectual autobiography. That's such a generative notion. And I really love the idea of meditation and attention as being a new wave, we could call it that, or a wave that in the context of the crisis of higher education seems absolutely necessary in terms of just how amped up over the years of neoliberal reform has sped up, standardized, quantified, made ratings, made so much out of the reach of listening, as opposed to really just getting work out as quickly as possible so it can be counted and rewarded. so I really think that that notion of meditation and slowing down and slow sociology being, which I write about in the book, that has given me a lot of support in thinking about how important it is to dwell with the data that we collect, as opposed to churn it and churn it out. And I think that your question, Rachel, and if I heard it right, you wanted me to reflect on sort of how this kind of research is different than my beginning research practice. Is that okay? Right. So as I say in the book, I have always taken a, quote, too long time in academic terms to write my books and to conduct my research. And I have not, I've never resolved that personal sense of failure in terms of what academia expects. But I have absolutely enjoyed and marveled and dwelled with the words and the images of all three sets of participants that I've been honored to be able to work with over the years, whether it was women returning to school to get their GEDs and being able to listen and tend to their childhood memories of school, or pregnant teens and listening to their stories over time. I've been a person who doesn't like to leave the field. I get enamored. I fall in love, and I've always seen that as I write in the book, just my style. And what gives me sustenance as a researcher are those relationships and paying attention. But this work really departed from my earlier books because I did take a leap that I felt like I was, jumping off the cliff by doing some of the creative making myself. And I still feel, I think I will always feel nervous about that part, because it's something that I wish, and maybe I'll do this in retirement. I never have had any kind of aesthetic training or art history involvement. The closest thing is that I'm married to an artist, and I think aesthetics are absolutely a key part of the way we make our worlds. So, but I feel like an imposter, which I know from listening years and years to doctoral students is something that I share with them, and that somehow I have felt along the way that one day I would grow up and not have that imposter syndrome. I have a feeling that's not going to happen. I'm just going to have to live with it. And the imposter part here is the making of the collages, which one small piece of what I did not publish in this book, but now have written an article and come clean with it. One of the reasons that making the collages was personally resonant for me was because I was doing this work during a time of having gotten a very bad diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis, and my hands were just unable to work very well, and I was in a lot of pain. So cutting around the edges and really being able to touch and work with Xeroxed copies of the photos. I could never have, I think, actually worked with the photo itself. Was personally kind of rehabilitating, and actually working with those tactile pieces allowed me to stay connected. And as I write, sort of intimately know those, what so many people saw as very mundane images. And as another side, sort of calling out higher ed, when I did this project, I was at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I tried desperately 3 years in a row to get funding from a part of Harvard that was supporting photography in research. And each year I would get back the rejection saying that the images weren't powerful enough. And that really also, it not just incensed me, but it made me think, well, so how can people not see the power of those moms in kitchens photographs? You know, and in some ways, trying to repurpose them and put them into play with the kids' own voices and with sound, I thought, well, maybe that is the answer. I don't know if it is, but I know that through collaboration, and I do also think that working collaboratively is something that I have really grown into enjoying. I would say as an early scholar, collaboration for me was mostly with participants, but not with any other people. It was more of a lone project. But this, putting together this archive and working with so many different people and being influenced by so many people is a whole different mode of research practice for me. And now I'm working with a team of 8. And I tell you, I don't know how we get anything done because, as you all know, collaboration just really takes time, and it really takes attention to the everydays of people's lives, and people coming in and out and having research meetings and ending up having a conversation about kids and grandkids and whatever. So yes, slowing down, meditating, collaborating, aesthetic appreciation, all of and trying to sustain imposter syndrome. I think at one point in this new piece, I talk about the tension between thinking, is this just bad research or is it bad art? You know, what is this? Because it can't be really called art, and I'm not sure it can be called research anymore. But I like your idea, Rachel, that maybe it can be called like the next kind of wave of research. But the last thing in thinking about your question, I have a dear colleague, John Wilson at Duke. He hired me when I was there, and he's always been, a person who will tell me that I'm sort of not being sociological enough. He sent me an email after reading the book and told me that he found the book to be an experience and not a book. And I really appreciate that idea. And he pulled out some pieces of writing and said, and what are you, a stand-up comic now? So, I mean, your words resonate with some other feedback that I'm getting, and that I so appreciate. Shirin, oh yes.
I need to just point out, I need to say, if people want to stay on after 3:30, our link is live after that. Some people might have to go in 6 minutes. So I just wanted to put that out there, but we can spend that in and obviously you want to be able to talk to Shirin's comments as well. So I just thought I'd put that there.
Thanks, Molly. Yes. Oh, Shirin, I really take very seriously your point about the depletion of children and of childhood activities that are so important, that are attached to this. And I think we have a lot to talk about that. And as Barbara Katz-Rothman wrote in the chat, it is very much a part of the way that women talk about domestic labor as well. But I was really impressed and struck by the understanding that care, including childbirth, for example, is painful. That it's not just about love. It's about a lot of other things. So I'll let that be the main comment, and thank you very, very much. Also knowing that I'm going to learn a lot from your studies as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wendy. And also we have such wonderful comments in the chat. We have 5 more minutes, and I just like to use that opportunity for anybody who would like to raise questions or comments for Wendy. So I'm not going to call on anybody, just you can unmute yourselves and speak. Is there anyone who would like to say anything here? Okay, I have a question. I'm good, but I'm just really, really interested in, well, so many of these things, but
Molly, Kathleen Lynch is raising her hand.
Okay, please, Kathleen, just speak.
Just Wendy, lovely to see you, and thank you. What I'd love to ask you is, you were taking a theme, a subject, which is not normally defined as central to education. So I'm just wondering about the ontological implications of it in terms of how you see what you think your book has to say back to education, including schooling, not just higher education. You know, we're dominated, the OECD, by the human capital model, by STEM. I'm just wondering what you think it has to say back in terms of changing what we do, even in terms of the centrality of what we have in the curriculum, not just how we manage and all of that. I'd love to hear your comment on that. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Kathleen. Yes, I think that typically care in education is discussed in terms of teachers and being caring for students, you know, in terms of compassion and all the ways, and contemporarily conversations about radical care and how critical care is not just about being nice, but it's really about challenging the way and dismantling elements of carelessness, as well as white supremacy and ways that harm has really been imposed. You know, even if we think about symbolic violence, in that school actually rests on. And then there's also the whole idea about the carceral continuum of schooling to prisons, and the idea that schools organized in a kind of as a carceral environment. I think this book is talking more about care as a continuum, a nexus between schools, families, and workplaces. And that typically in education, we don't think about that nexus as being central enough to the way we need to think about reorganizing schooling. So that's what I'm hoping people get out of the book, aside from the kids' recognition, the fact that there is a consciousness that kids already have in different ways. And of course, I would love to imagine somebody doing something similar to this in middle-class homes, more well-to-do kids, which I would almost bet my life on would generate a very different idea about what helping is, what care is, what work is that is required. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Well, we actually have come to the end of our time, but if people would, there's a wonderful, very lively chat, which will be available for, I believe Zoom sends that back to me, and then I will distribute that. But if there are any final questions or comments, we do understand a number of people are having to leave, but if there are any final questions or comments, Wendy, are you available for a few more minutes? So if any, I don't want to cut off anyone. Okay, so
I want to say hi to so many of you.
yeah, what a fabulous, fabulous group. And I mean, this chat is so alive. And actually, I have to say, Wendy, your book invites the kind of commentary it actually got. I mean, Rachel and Shirin, you're absolutely wonderful, thought-provoking. You really went there deep into it. And of course, that kind of book invites that. And I think, it's exciting, as I said in the beginning, to be in the presence of this kind of scholarship. It does give me hope. It gives me hope as an academic, but it gives me hope as a person, that we have such extraordinary and complex problems around us, and sometimes the academy is asking us, demanding that we turn our heads away. But this kind of work is doing just the opposite. And it's so important. And just for me personally, this hour and a half to be in the presence of this conversation, it's very, very invigorating. So thank you, Wendy, for having written the book, and to Rachel and Shirin for having really given it the kind of thoughtful questioning that it deserves. So I will send this out to everyone who's registered for the event, and just to say thank you to everyone. I also put an announcement in the chat for our next event, which is actually in only a week's time. And Corinne put a link if you are not a member of the Association for Narrative Research and Practice, the old CNR, and you would like to be, and you would like to hear about more wonderful events. Our wonderful Jill Bradbury will be giving we are having a book launch for Jill's wonderful book on June the 11th. So lots of great stuff. Now that we can finally fly, we have, the last thing to say is that, of course, this book launch was supposed to be last year. And both Rachel and Shirin, we were going to do it at the Thomas Core Research Unit Library, thanks to our wonderful Anne Phoenix. And so this was this event that was going to happen. And this was one of the first where it was able to have a delayed life, but a Zoom life which included people in places that it wouldn't have. So this was, thank you everyone for being willing to come back and try it again. And yeah, thank you for Wendy for this wonderful kind of scholarship. So yeah.
Thank you, Molly, so much for hanging in there with it.
Thanks, Molly.
Take care,
Thanks
everyone.
all. Bye-bye.
Bye, bye, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Wonderful.
Great.
Yeah, nice to see everybody. Bye, Molly.
Bye.